What's up, everyone? Happy Friday and welcome to the game on Pack Slate Live. God, Wednesday. What day is it? The show where we talk about all the cybersecurity shenanigans you need to be aware of. Full transparency, getting the show off the ground was a little chaotic because I am at an event here in Denver. And because I also live in Denver, there's no hotel room. So we're figuring it out. We're on a walk bridge. We're going to get it done. But let's pull in Matt and talk about what we're going to talk about today. What's up, Matt?
I am also in a hotel and have just landed in this hotel in the last 20-ish minutes or so. So, Dom, I totally feel you right now. We're living on the seat of our pants on this one. So, Wednesday, Friday, it doesn't matter to me. All right.
So where are you at?
So, Dom, I'm in Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina right now. I'll be here until tomorrow afternoon, and then I'm going to Baltimore, and then I'm going to San Diego, and then I'm going to Toledo, and then Grand Rapids. San Diego. Yeah, that's a
travel planner, man. That's a little back and forth.
I know. They just drew lines like this. It's me. I used my left eye when I was drawing out this one, so it works out. Well, Dom, what are we here to talk about today, man? This is kind of the first in a few-part series of thinking like an attacker, but what's the goal?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to think like an attacker, and we're going to start at the beginning, like everyone else would. And I was just actually at the same event talking with John Murchison about what we're talking about today, and he was diving through some stuff. It's all online, right? But what we're doing is today looking at OSINT, or open source intelligence, and ways we can learn about you, and you're never going to see us trying to learn about you, right? So you'll never know that you're potentially a target.
Yeah, and that's a great call out, Dom. There's when you're doing recon, and this is what we're going to be talking about today is reconnaissance. There are things where it is the, passive aspect of it, right? Passivity, where I'm not actually touching, you don't see me, I'm using open source things that I can learn about you. And then there's that active phase when I've gone from passivity to active. Just to be very clear, today we're going to be very passive. Our intention is not to do anything active, aside from maybe loading a web page or two, which we can talk about when we get to it, just to learn what it is. But ultimately, we're going to be very passive in this, and then we'll actually have a guest on next week to do more active things and talk about those from that perspective. So, all right, let's get in with the brilliant Robin Harris as usual, and then we'll come back and we'll dig into some open source intelligence techniques.
Are you ready?
So we are continuing our little mini episode talking about data. And in this week's episode, we're going to go to Australia. And we're going to look at an accident that could have jeopardized retirement funds. Let me tell you what happened. It's fascinating because we're human. So they took a script that was used for test that would auto-delete data after a year so that they wouldn't have to manually go back and delete test data. So the data was put into the private cloud, right? But the test script, maybe they didn't realize at the time, was used in the production move of this data. So this company, a year goes, everything's fine. They're monitoring, they're doing what they're supposed to do, and they notice, hey, something's missing. Hey, something's wrong. Our data's not there. The files aren't there. We're not getting the reports and the dashboards and all these things. And when they looked, contacted Google Cloud, the whole instance had been erased. And the backup had been erased. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine what those employees were feeling? Can you imagine what the stewards of that data were feeling? That's horrifying. This was just a mistake. This was just a human mistake. But there was grace here. Somebody was smart enough in moving this data to not only put that data into the Google Cloud, they also had a backup in a whole nother cloud provider. And that is what saved them. A backup of a backup in an alternate cloud provider. That's not how companies normally do things, but something made somebody take an extra step that saved them. It saved the company, it saved Google, It saved the hardship that would have been put on all those people in Australia. Data is so important. We need to treat data like oxygen. Well, maybe that's not a good example because we kind of take oxygen for granted. We need to treat data like it's so precious to our business and our personal lives, because it is. And we're going to do a lot more talking about data, because data is what the threat actors are going after. Data is an asset. It's a very, very valuable asset, and companies have to take exceptional measures to protect it.
Time to level up. Level up.
So, yeah, thanks, Robin. More wise words from her. And Matt has become a circle in the corner. So, what are we doing, Matt?
I has become a circle in the corner. That is an accurate statement.
Like one of those Harry
So
Potter
what I
pieces
wanted to
of art,
do,
you know, moving paint.
I can't escape.
Yeah,
It's
it's
crazy. No, I digress. So what we wanted to tackle with this series, the How We Would Hack You series, it comes from a talk that I've done with Jason Slagle and Tom Lawrence and a few other people over the years. But it really is just trying to help you understand how threat actors can use information that's available to them and the steps they're going to take to attack you. And so what we're going to do is I'll go ahead and first say I'm not a great hacker. I'm a decent hacker at best. But I am going to try to show and demonstrate how threat actors work and use things so that you can think like them and use that to protect yourself. That's the goal of today. All right, so the agenda. So we're basically doing recon today, right? And if you're not familiar, Dom, what is recon? Help people understand, what is reconnaissance.
Reconnaissance, the verb of which is reconnoitering, is the process of learning about something. Like summed up. Yeah. I took a whole reconnoitering class. Yeah. But
Of course you did.
in general, like you can recon anything, right? But
Sure.
in this case, we're performing reconnaissance against potentially a target of an incident, right? So we're trying to learn
Yeah.
about you or your organization, what makes it tick, what players are there. And it says right here, like what is your technology footprint? What is your human footprint?
Yeah. Why do we want to do that, Dom? I mean, why do we want to do reconnaissance in any operation, regardless of whether it's a cyber op?
It's never a good idea to walk in blind, right? If you have a new prospect, you want to know more about them than their name before you have a meeting, right? And this is really
Yeah.
similar. I want to have an idea of who you are. I'm going to learn a few things from that. I might know where I want to start a potential attack, or I might learn potentially that you're not necessarily the victim I want to put my time into, right? So I might move on after reconnoitering.
How bad would Ocean's 11 have been if they just showed up to the casino to rob it? Right? Like it would have lost a lot of the movie ultimately. So
Yeah. It would have been a terrible story.
But the point, it would have been a terrible story. But the point is, what we want to do first is learn about you. I want to know how you think. I want to know the kind of things you do. I want to try to figure out some patterns. I want to see if you expose some information that makes my job easier. So what we're going to try to do in recon is, start infrastructural, right? Look for domains, subdomains, IP addresses, things of that nature. Then the next one is going to be like, what services are out there? What are you using? What are the tools you're using? What are the things that you use and consume? And how do you use those in your day-to-day life? And the last piece, and I said it accidentally from a Freudian slip, I suppose, is people, right? Who are the people I need to attack? Who are the ones that have access? Who are the ones that you've acquired? Who are those ones that I need to do things with? And if you really think about it, it's first, learn about the infrastructure, learn about the world you're going to be attacking. Second, learn about the things they consume. Those are very helpful for things like pretexting and all kinds of other stuff. And then learn about the humans. So we're going to kind of do that. And then the last piece is trying to start to build a map in whatever works for you, whether that is a actual map that you draw out, whether that is, a text document that I'm going to use today. And I'll add to this. So Jason Slagle, myself, Tom Lawrence, and John Hammond are doing a thing called the Hackening. And that is where we have 50 MSPs that have signed up, 26 of which have been willing to sign the legal agreement, or 27 have been willing to sign the legal agreement. And we're going to do a pen test. We're going to hack them as a red team type engagement where we have no information. We're having to start blind, just like a threat actor would. And I'll share some of that data as we go through this without giving away too much for my talk coming up. as
Well,
well.
they're all buttoned
All right.
up, so like going to be a really boring
Oh,
talk, as I understand
it's not. It's not. I've already found SCADA exposed to the internet that has 10.0 vulnerabilities. I've found PHP. I've found Suite 32. I've found all kinds of stuff. So it is not all buttoned up. Yet, to your point, Dom, they'd be the most presumably buttoned up, right? Because they've suggested, please come at me. I digress. Okay, so we're going to pick a subject to dig into, and I want to speak that I chose Integris because I worked for Integris or at least Iconic before it was acquired for 11 years, but also because everything we're doing today is something anybody on the internet can do, and as a matter of fact, it's not even illegal. There's only just a couple of little pieces that might potentially be considered illegal, which would be those times when you go to check the page to see what kind of service it is, but you could do that with another tool. You could use something like Built With or other methodologies to do those things and not necessarily yourself cross that barrier. What is that barrier, Dom? What can you not do if you do not have someone signing something that says you can do it? Where do we draw that line usually as pen testers, Dom?
Oh, no, this is a great question. So in the realm of being a professional with a moral compass, right? Perhaps I avoid doing any actual harm, to the business, to any people, or to any. However,
Sure.
And I'm not a lawyer, but like in my experience, the law is super wishy-washy on this because it's kind of left at unauthorized access. And I think a question that's been answered both ways in case law, by the way, is just loading a web page unauthorized access.
That's what I was
literally
after.
anyone can do that, right?
Yep.
And I would say no. So if I go to your firewall login page, I don't think but if I try to log in, that's a different thing, right?
Dom, you tossed that needle right down the hallway, man, because that's the problem. There are just as many people that say, no, anybody can peruse a website. There's absolutely nothing illegal with going to that website. But the difference is the intent. You went to that website, not with the intent of being an inside user using that site. But I would also agree with you, Dom, that for me, if it's publicly exposed and I'm just going to the site, I do not consider that to be something that someone would be able to prosecute on. Although, to your point, it could fall either way. All I'm really saying is, if you're going to look at these
on the
techniques and learn
prosecutor,
about
the
them,
judge, the jury. So like maybe just don't do it as a rule of thumb. But
that's what we're going to say here. For this show's purposes, do not do anything we are showing you unless it is your own infrastructure. And we will draw that line because when we go to those active measures, we'll do it with systems we have access to. That said, I also want to take a second to talk about what's happening right now in the public news around someone that is a good faith hacker decided to show that the city was lying, and the city is now suing this gentleman, which is all over the news, and we're hearing about it right now. But the point is that we're going to try to teach you these techniques until you just understand how somebody's going to look at you. That's the point of this, is to understand how someone's going to look at you. So let's dig into it. All right, what are we doing? The first thing we're going to do is try to find domain names and IPs of the original company. Now, I'm focusing this on MSPs, so I have a little bit of this will be slanted to MSPs, but it really applies to anything, right? So let's go see what we can find by using something like Google to do OSINT things, like I'm searching for employee names, I'm searching for domain names, I'm searching for things that you have. Security Trails, which we're going to show in a minute. Then DNS Dumpster, which does similar things as Security Trails in its way. And then just other tools for DNS requests to look things up. I use MX Toolbox just because it's easy and it's not coming from me as a DNS query, so it doesn't come back to me in any level. You could do that in many, many other ways. So anybody wants to make fun of me, just do it in the comments so we get the interactions. We appreciate it. Okay, so
only on
let's
YouTube
take a look. Yeah. Only on YouTube /Pax8. Please say all the bad comments there if you need to, and we'll talk about it. All right, so let me go to my screen. And we're going to start by just taking what we already know, right? We know integrisit.com. That's the domain. We already have it. So we're going to copy this. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go and just look at it from Security Trails. What Security Trails is by Recorded Future. You can get an account for this for free if you want to use it in a free capacity. And you can also pay for it so you have more API access and things. I typically interact with Security Trails through something like the Harvester, which is a great tool to use APIs. You could do it with Spiderfoot. You could do it with the Harvester. I think a mass will do some similar things. I may be incorrect on a mass, actually, now that I think about it. But let's go ahead and put in this domain. So we have integrisit.com, right, Dom? And we want to learn some information about it. Well, what I always do, and I've done this now 50 some odd times for MSPs just in the last couple of weeks, where we're doing this enumeration. So I've got a nice little notebook, and I started by saying, okay, Integris IT, domains, and IPs. And then we have Security Trails here. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go to security trails and just try to start looking around. Well, I already noticed that
Really
the
nice
first
of you
thing...
to neatly package the prosecutor's evidence for them. So it's clear to be
Thanks, Dom. I sure appreciate you. Like, here's the evidence that Matt definitely hit all these sites. So the first things we're presented with is they are using Cloudflare, which means at least their primary website, their primary
That's
A
great.
record for that domain does go to Cloudflare. Huzzah. Of my mapping right now, only about 20% of MSPs are using something like a Cloudflare protection in some way. It hasn't been as high as I would have expected. The second thing I always like to do is go look at the text records, right? So in this text record, I already know that they're using ValiMail, right? Because I see that they're using this RFC compliant methodology for SPF records. They've got a
So
DMARC
side
record published.
tangent. Let's talk about this because a lot of these companies that do this, like, so ValiMail is pretty obvious. It's vala.email. We can figure that one out. But a lot of companies like
Right.
to buy like super generic domains. And I want everyone to understand that within 3 or 4 days of the company starting to use that domain, we know what company it is. You're not hiding it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like at the end of the
And
day, the
speak
IP
towards that,
address
Dom.
says the company.
Yeah, like some of
Like
this
there
stuff
is
you
stuff to
publish,
anonymity.
right?
Right.
Yeah, totally. You're publishing this out there and saying, hey, I'm using this. There's no anonymity, to your point, for that domain name. Now, you can do things to keep that domain name only on services that are ephemeral and anonymous to some extent, like things like Cloudflare and other WAF methodologies. But some stuff you just can't avoid. Like, you have to publish an SPF record. Now, you can hide where you're serving from by using services like ValiMail, which is what we're seeing here, right? PAX8 verification. So at some point, they're a PAX8 customer. Huzzah. They used no before, quite likely. So there's just a lot of evidence of information. Doesn't mean they're using it now. It just means at some point they published it. What's that, brother?
They're proof point users, right? And we know it's proof point essentials based on the domain name.
They use Duo. They're likely using Duo. They're likely using no before. What else have we found so far? Proof point. So I just start by looking here. Atlassian. They're using Atlassian in some form. So I'm just trying to build a map, y'all. I'm just trying to build a map of what stuff they're using, or at least likely are. They're obviously using Microsoft. They also have an Apple domain verification. I don't want to be exhaustive of this because that takes hours and hours. For those 50 separate MSPs, I probably have 240 hours in just the recon, the initial recon of those. All right, so we got what we could from the SPF record. We also see that they're managing their own name servers. So maybe we put that in our notes, right? We're like, hey, they has their own DNS. I don't know if that's the appropriate way to document
Actually,
that, but
though,
that's how I'm documenting.
if we wanted to dig a layer deeper, we should resolve one of those and see who owns it.
We will. Yes, and we shall. And there's a couple ways to do that without being active.
I know who TaiG is, by the way. So they're actually not.
I do not.
That is DNS made easy. So they are white.
Thank you, Dom. And I guess a lot of this stuff is actually true. That would be domains. What did you say it was, Dom?
DNS made easy.
DNS made easy. Thank you. And also, I really want, that's a great opportunity to bring this up. When you're doing a pen test, you care more about this. When you're doing this as a bad guy, you do not. However, I might care whether I'm attacking somebody's own native services they've hosted or something they're paying someone else for a lot of reasons. Maybe I don't want to waste my time. Maybe it's a stronger adversary if I'm going to go attack DNS made easy. There's just things that don't have a lot of reward. So what I'm trying to do in this, and Dom, you just helped me with that, is say, where are those things that I shouldn't look at and deal with because they're not their own infrastructural stuff. They're some third-party service of some sort. So great call out. All right, what else can we figure out? So we've gotten a lot out of the SPF record and DNS. I also like to poke at historical records just to see if they've made major changes recently. You can look at that by whether things are active, how long they've been seen, are they new, right? Like if you have a new IP address that's come up for some reason, interesting amount of information there, but all right. Unit A179F Silver Corp. All right, fair. That's pretty specific on its organization. All right, I digress. Okay, so, and we're just looking for any IP address changes. You can usually look to see if they've maybe fired a data center recently, have moved a new data center for some, like whatever it may be, okay? I don't get a lot of data out of that usually. It just can help you sometimes. There's something to see in there that gives you some information about what they're doing. But the juicy part is...
If you're looking at this in the A record, so what that's pulling is IP who's, right? Who owns that network it's getting it out of?
Yes.
Who is in the ASNs? And if you're seeing like Comcast Business, Well, now it's highly likely that it is some sort of like crappy coax circuit
Yes.
in your office.
Yes.
Right?
And we're going to see a lot of those in here, I promise, because I've already found them. Yeah. So great call. It's doing organization lookups. And if you notice, look, so about 2 years ago, they engaged Cloudflare. Prior to that, it was Google. It's possible it's still Google. You could still potentially go hit that IP address, and they have simply just Cloudflare WAFed it. And I have found that. You could do that with my domains. You'll find Dom's server. If you go dig back through some of my stuff, no, we always use Cloudflare. It's going to be hard. You would have a much harder time finding it. But if you find someone that's just recently switched to Cloudflare, you could find that they have potentially shown their old IP addresses.
My server is not in my basement, by the way. So,
Huzzah. So now what we do is go to subdomains. In this case, what Security Trails is doing, and I'm going to be summative, but Security Trails is looking at recursive DNS lookups, like things that I have looked up before or other humans have looked up before. These DNS repositories will aggregate that data and start to give that data away in certain ways, right? Or sell it or other things of that nature. And so a lot of these products like Security Trails, same thing with DNS Dumpster. DNS Dumpster and Security Trails both try to do the same thing. They're just doing it basically the same way, but a little bit cleaner probably. What I like about DNS Dumpster is it gives you a one quick poke with all of their ASNs pretty quickly up here. So I have which ASNs they're affiliated with, and then what their DNS servers are. Also, TXT records, everything in one piece. What I do love is this map, though. They do has a map somewhere. Oh, is it too big? It's too big for the map. Yeah, okay. The map broke it. 115 subdomains is probably too much. But both of these are trying to find subdomains, like controlrelay.integrisIT, D1Veeam. One of the things that I'll say, just as a stylistic conversation, is the reason we use names like this, like CAS, WAN2, controller relay, is to make it easier to remember exactly what they do. What's the downside of that, Dom?
I already know exactly what they do.
Yeah, I know that's a Veeam server because it says the word Veeam, and there's not many other times you're going to see the word Veeam in there, right?
I'm a ransomware operator. I like that one. Just saying.
I definitely do because it means backups, right? So Veeam, yeah. What is it? What was that domain? Let me go back. I'm not going to do this. D1Veeam. So D1Veeam dot. And we're going to go poke at this a little bit. D1Veeam dot integrisit.com.
Now, it's also important to point out that like there's always going to be services that you expose for one reason or another.
Oh,
what matters is how you expose it. Like every, if you look up Microsoft, there's tons of services. Or if you look up most like city governments, there's going to be like an RDS or a VPN. But it's more about how it's exposed and do you have a reason to expose it, which honestly sort of brings me to these, subdomains we were talking about before the show.
Yeah. So to your point, and actually this kind of brings us back to that show we did a while back with Merrill talking about Entra Private Access or Cloudflare private tunnels. If you were to do a similar lookup, so I'll just do it on me. So back in DNS Dumpster, when we see all this information we're seeing about Integris, if you go to cybermattlee.com and do the same thing, there are many, many A records that you will not find. They do not show up in DNS queries. Right? I don't have those A records available. There's at least 6 that should be here that I'm using every day that do not show up. Why? It's because I'm using them behind Cloudflare private access, and they don't actually have a DNS record that queries and responds externally that shows me an IP address. They're only going to respond when I'm inside of the private access tunnels, which means that it never gets exposed publicly, yet I get the same benefit of it being exposed publicly, which is the benefit of ZT, ZTNA type methodologies, right? That is the benefit of ZT, is doing those type of things to reduce your attack surface that you expose from your protect surface subset. So just saying, if you notice, because I'm using Cloudflare and I'm using Cloudflare private tunnel, there's a whole bunch of domains that do not look up that we could find in alternate ways, quite likely, than this. But
well, those two services are your public services, right? Like everyone needs to see those services to access your stuff.
Yes, yes, that's right. My website, my public site. So let's look through some of these and let's see if anything pops out, Dom. So we've got these subdomains. We have tickets.integris. I wonder what that guy's going to be. And I am being active here, right? This goes back to your point you made, Dom, of querying it. Well, I definitely get that it's na.myconnectwise.net, which means they are using a hosted ConnectWise instance, quite likely. Right? So they're using a CNAME. And that is one thing to note. If you are going to do pen testing specifically, you will want to make sure that you are only isolating things that they are that they own or they're hosting. You don't want to do this with cloud services, as in the case of this ConnectWise. ConnectWise.
So that would
Why would I
officially
want to
be out
gather
of the
these,
scope
Dom?
of your pen test.
Well,
I mean,
they'd
you
be
want
out
to
of the
know, right?
scope of
If you're
some things.
right,
What I mean by that is they'd probably be out of the scope for exploiting their systems for making decisions to not patch, but they would definitely be in scope for me spraying passwords against, right? And so why do I want to find these
sure.
services? This goes to why do I always keep a list of what people are using? I always have this side tab here, tools in use, is because now I have two things. One, I know where I want to go spray passwords, right? If I get passwords or compromises or I want to test things or brute force, whatever it might be, I know where to go spray. But second, I also know how to pre-text you. Hi, Dom at Integris. This is Matt with ConnectWise support. We just noticed you got a major challenge with people attacking the front end of your ConnectWise. Can I get permission to get your... There's just pre-texting stuff that can be done that would be out of that. Like, hi, this is Matt with Duo or DNS Made Easy. So there are aspects of this that I think come into having, to your point, knowing your enemy, right? Understanding that surface area, try to figure out what they use so you can be contextually relevant. Okay, so we found some stuff. So Nimble API. One of the things that stuck out to me is see these VPN dots. They all have a secondary subdomain, ham, VPN.ham, VPN.den. What do those sound like to you, Dom?
I'm pretty
That
sure
middle
because I've
section.
been to Den before, and
I've
Den is
been
right
to
up the street
Den.
from me.
It is right up the street from you. So I think what they've done is they've made A records, subdomains, and then subdomains of those subdomains to be A records that sort by category, which means I could actually start building a map in my mind in here of saying, hey, you know what? They've got a DEN, they've got a HAM, they've got a MSQ, MSP, they've got a... I can start categorizing them because they've done the work for me. They've made it easy for me to know that there's a subdomain of vpn.msp. Right? So what I'm getting at is,
And
some of the things,
you know,
yeah, go ahead, Dom.
they're conveniently airport codes, so it's really easy for me to know exactly where it's at. It's not like Office 7; it is DEN, which is the code for
Now,
those airports.
I can bash on this because I'm the one that created this. So I can actually know exactly what it was for and make fun of myself because I did this methodology to understand every time we made an acquisition what that next city code was. And therefore, we had the ability to A record and sort. I'm simply pointing out that by doing that, I have also created, and Tim and whoever else has continued that from there forward, have also created a lot of surface area mapping that I can do, that I can figure out which office, which WANs, and which IPs point to. Why would that matter? Why would I want that categorization?
Well, you know, and if I just wanted to mess with you, right, which I often do, they're just like, oh, that's
You do.
Comcast. It's got
Fair.
really,
Yeah.
really crappy bandwidth. I'm just going to push a little DDoS action towards that IP. You know, like, so there's probably a valid reason for this, right? To your point, sorting out your sites and being able to make VPN connections and the like. But at the same time, understand that now you've exposed what is most likely really crappy internet circuit across the public DNS.
Which I wouldn't be able to find otherwise, right? Like I would have no way to find that in easy paths other than this is just such an easy path for me to figure this out. Why do I want to know what those IPs are? And this is what we're going to dig into next. So first, we're going to dig into at least this kind of recon of finding these services, right? Finding subdomains like WAN1.MRQ, which is likely MRQ is a site. WAN1 is their primary internet, right? To your point. And then we're going to check and see. Now, I do happen to know that Integris, at least in the past, have been really good at blocking Shodan IPs. So there hopefully won't be a lot of what's in Shodan here. But let's talk back. I just want to make sure we're still tackling this. So Google, Security Trails, DNS Dumpster, MX Toolbox. So what we would do is just systemically, one by one, Dom, go through each of these things and then go to try to figure out what we can map of that, what it is. Like this is probably the first internet from MRQ. Document those things. And as we go down that historical A records of all these subdomains, that have changed, or all these subdomains, we'll find new places to map. We'll find new things that we might want to scan. We'll find new things we might want to try to password spray against. It's interesting. They did some
also, typically speaking, too, like if you're going to start being active, which we're not going to in this episode, but if you're going to start being active, DNS is a great way to do it because DNS is always busy. Like the amount of noise that hits your DNS, it's going to be very hard to point out the dude that happened to do 20 lookups, right? So even like so security trail is going to be out of date from time to time, right? But know that it's still not going to be hard for us to just figure out what the latest IP is if that record still exists.
What do we have here? Do we have a self-signed?
With default cert sad cloud, yeah, it is self-signed.
Yeah, default cert. 8028. So this is what we're going to get into now. So now you're starting to enumerate. You're like, wow, I probably found a network controller for them. Now I would say document, write down the address. The nice thing about Unify is they're so nice as to expose their version number to you easily in the return on the primary page, which you and I, Dom, have done a video about 2 or 3 years ago where we were popping Unify controllers with Log4j. But the point is, so we're going to use things like these subdomains to try to find all of that infrastructure and then start documenting it, right? But one of the things that we want to talk about next is now we've got Integris and we're finding all these services and we're starting to map what they use. What are the next things we need to do? Well, I think we should probably move on to who we should be attacking.
One thing that
from that what?
we probably
go ahead.
So is just hitting the website, right? So Integris is a pretty large MSP. So like if we just go to the website, we probably get a list of all their offices, right? They're large footprint because that's something to brag about. Is a growing company, and I can correlate all that to airport codes and probably get addresses and start to understand exactly where they're at if I want to deploy sort of human intelligence assets or social engineering assets. I can start to do that. Look at that. It's got the address here.
There's DEN, Bonita Springs, Tampa, Atlanta is going to be ATL, KC, Wichita, Baltimore. That's BWI. Boston's going to be BOS. Marquette, I don't know what that is. Duluth, Hibbing. Hibbing's probably one of the ones we already found. Hampstead. Yeah. So basically what we're getting at is, to Dom's point, you can use a combination of like open source intelligence and then just your own brain to look at things. In fact, when I try to figure out like what somebody's using for their tools, let's go to the client support button and see what they tell me to do. Like, and we're going to get to this in a bit. Okay, that's portal.integris. That's integrisit.connect booster. So they're now using connect booster as well. So let's just put that in there. Right, so I'm just building a map. I'm just building a mental map of them. Okay, so FID support is different than Expert Caltech. So they have Expert Connect. That's caltech.bank. We now have a new domain that we might want to add. So we're going to go in here and say Caltech, because my gut says that's an acquisition. Now I happen to know it's an acquisition, but Caltech what was it? Caltech what? Bank?
Bank.
Which allows you to then pivot that to go say, okay, let's look at Caltech.bank and let's see what they've got. All right, cool. Those are going to intercatus.bank. They have portal.caltech.bank. These are going to Caltech records, so they have their own ASN. They have their own errand block.
Okay.
Yeah. So now this just, and does that make sense? Like for anybody watching this, how I'm going to go one thing. And Jason Slagle and I've done this a bunch in the last couple of weeks, right? Where you're like, wow, they bought this one other company, which is actually one of my slides I wanted to go over. And so we'll just jump to that for a second, come back to this one, which is, did they make any acquisitions? Because, hey, I wonder if, Dom, and you tell me if this is just crazy talk, but is it possible that some people buy companies, extract the revenue and profit from them, and leave sitting the way it was before? Is that possible, Dom? Would you believe that's possible ever happens?
Perhaps from time to time.
Perhaps. Yeah, so maybe they've left stuff around. So the next thing I usually will want to do is go like, okay, let's just go to the Googs. Let's just go to google.com, and we're going to search for Integris acquires MSP. Let's just search that. Oh, we have this Florida-based MSP. Cool, network people. We have this other one. We have Inquires Blue Jeans and Security 7. We have Compudine. We have, I would imagine we'll see Caltech in here somewhere. I think that was Caltech, actually. So, no, that was network people. But there's Caltech will be in here. And what I would do is then try to find, okay, so they just said Caltech, Caltech, MSP, Integris. Now I'm going to go like, okay, cool. What is that? Well, let's see if channel requires Caltech. Let me see if I can try to find Caltech's old domain address, which we've already found, right? So we wound that through caltech.bank. But the point is that we can start seeing how you can just simply start being persistent, digging into subdomains, looking at those sites and enumerating, look at the certificates as you saw me do, right? And try to see, can I find a certificate that doesn't match or that's tied to some other domain? Yeah,
What's peculiar is just looking at these host names.
These are
These
actual
all
banks.
look
These are end clients. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, this is terrifying.
Yeah.
There's Cornerstone.
Okay.
And so now I can find banks through that IP address. I guess the point I'm trying to a little bit hyperbolize, and Dom, you just kind of like made it for me, is don't use DNS as your primary method of making placeholders and records for yourself unless you absolutely have to, because it's going to give me the ability to go find, okay, here's Caltech. And this is what I wanted to show anyway.
Well, you know, your
So-
other challenge though is going to be like in this scenario, they're probably like they're serving an SSL certificate, right? So you can't. Well, that one seems broken, but nonetheless, you can't do that with an
Yes.
IP. So you have to have someone's DNS to do that.
Yep. So we're now looking at another service that I wanted to talk about, which is Shodan. I tried to poke a couple of IPs in here to see if they came up, but Shodan is a open source intelligence resource that you can pay for. I think I paid $40 and I have a lifetime membership or something. You can pay for more expensive ones. But basically you can come in with IP addresses. You can search for certain things that are like vulnerabilities. Like whenever I'm doing my vulnerability hunting, I typically will search Shodan for the hash of the favicon of the site I'm looking for, because it's pretty much always going to be accurate. They won't have somebody else using my favorite favicon in the corner there for their site. But what does Shodan do, Dom? What is Shodan? Help people maybe a little better define what it's actually doing.
So a search engine. We'll go back to Google for a second. Uses spiders. Right? It scrolls your website. It's like, oh, Matt's got this page and that page, and these link together, and here's how. Shodan is literally the same thing, except it is looking for hosts, and it is crawling for open ports and services and certificates they serve up in software versions. Screenshots is back, especially back in the like pre-network level authentication days of RDP. You would use Shodan and see the Windows login, right? It is essentially a search engine for open things on the internet, more so than the content. And it'll pull the software version banners and sort of what ports are open. And as you can see in this example, it's serving you the whole SSL certificate, so you know where they get their cert. So there's a lot of data in Shodan.
And there's data that's missing down here because they're a good MSP. And that is the data that would tell me what vulnerabilities exist on this host as the last time it was scanned, which saves me having to do it. So I'll often go to Shodan, because if it's so bad that you've left it and Shodan has found that you have vulnerabilities, I'm probably going to find you don't patch well, right? I'm probably going to find you have vulnerabilities, because if it gets here, it meant it was there a long time, because it's not perfect at finding it in seconds. So to your point, I like to look at these first and see what is the SSL cert. And in fact, a lot of the domains that we found during our scanning of MSPs have been through old domain certs. Like they just left a cert up on an old infrastructure, moved it to a new IP address, and just let it have a conflict and said, we don't care, it's our tool. But that then lets me get into it and find other domains that I can enumerate and see if you left stuff there, right? For example, I found a hanging A record when I was digging into a former acquisition of Integrisys called Choose Networks. And ChooseNetworks.com doesn't even exist. They were bought 9 years ago, and there's still active responding DNS pointing to something. If I wanted to, I could go get a IP address from Green Cloud for this IP and theoretically have access as that site and match ChooseNetworks.com, which means I might match an SPF record for inside the mail domain, which means I might have a better chance of delivering malicious mail internal to the Integris IT people using old domains like Choose Networks.
Well, and you can also get a certificate, right? If you can get HTTP behind that host name, you can get a certificate.
Exactly. Exactly. So what else in this enumeration? So we've covered subdomain enumeration. I should also note there's tools that do this really fast for you, or at least pretty well, that'll go and crawl this instead of manually doing it. I do sometimes do manual. I sometimes do automatic. The nice thing about manual is you're going to catch those other contextual clues that an automated tool is just not going to find, right? Even if you get into Spiderfoot or other things, right, it'll send you down bad paths. But okay, so domain enumeration. Let's talk now about employees, right? Because we talked about acquisitions. The benefit of acquisitions is you can do the same thing you did with this to find IPs and employees and all kinds of things and give you context. You can find out that this was the old CEO of that one company that got acquired, and now they're working over here in this capacity. And maybe there's some attack surface from a former time that might carry over. Maybe they're using the same passwords. Maybe they're using the same thing. So subdomains are easier to find when you look at acquisitions. But then let's talk about the humans. For me, one of the things that I like to just start with, and there are tools to automate this that are out there from many different places. I wouldn't use my own me, my real me, if I was doing this, because I wouldn't want people to know it was me looking at their stuff. But I would literally just come in. Yeah, who's this? Why is this Matt Lee guy looking at all my profiles? I'm going to go look at Integris IT. Sorry. And then try to just say, okay, posts, Integris, let's look at people. Oh, my, first peoples. So we now have 74 employees that I can start grabbing, like Jonathan Bear, a strategic operations manager out of Fort Worth. I can get Douglas Matulowick, right? I know Doug, he's a good dude. Tim Klein, Tony Miller, retired actually. He's done. Huzzah, good for him. David Yendry, also retired. But the point is I can start building this list of those humans and try to find a victim or try to search for passwords in things like dehashed, right? So dehashed.com lets you go in. I have to make sure I'm really human. If this thing ever fails, I'm out, boys. Like if it ever just tells me I'm not a human, I know for sure and I'm done. But I can come in here and search those email addresses like jr@choosenetworks.com or something. Oh, I didn't get that in there correctly. But you can go in and try to find about people or about domains like Integris, IT.com. Dehashed is one great way to find passwords and things. And so what we'd be looking for is trying to find linked credentials for people to validate if those linked credentials are used other places, right? So it's part of a password spraying build. But ultimately, what I want to do is find out who is in your organization and what do they do for a living, right? So in this case, we'd say Jonathan Bear, long time employee, came from acquisition of I think that was network solutions or something, whatever, it doesn't matter. The point is you're going to build up these people lists so you can try to figure out who has access. Dom, where would you start? Like what does every MSP do that seems to persist forever that makes one or two people the easiest targets in the world?
Provide help desk.
That too, touche. I was really going for like owners typically get every bit of access because they're the owner. Damn it, I need access, which means I'm going to attack you.
I like
don't usually use your tools. What's that? You go bottom up.
I like to work the bottom up. Yeah.
I just bet on the highest principle of least privilege failure for the owner and just go that direction first, right? And it makes it easier for those gift card text messages.
That's okay.
It is true.
It does.
It is true. No, I tease. But the point is, when we're doing this type of user enumeration, and there's a lot of different ways to do it. There's a lot of different ways to see how broad it can go. If you're ever curious and want to dig, I find this to be a little bit dated, but it's still a very valid tool. So OSINT, framework.com. I think just open OSINTframework.com. No. Yeah, it is. You can go and see some suggestions of the different sites. Like, hey, there's some username search engines. Oh, maybe name check lets me find out what someone's email address or username is. And so if I'm like, oh, Tubo Show, is Tubo Show used everywhere? Like you can use usernames and figure out where they've been used, right? Like, oh, looks like Tubo Show.photos. So those are domains. You can get different services. So you can check, like, are they using Tubo Show on Facebook? Are they using Tubo Show on Reddit or on eBay or on Twitter or WordPress or Blogger or Flickr or Pinterest or Twitch? And so as it turns out, my son's gamer handle is being used on Twitch. Didn't know he had a Pinterest account. No, I tease. But the point is you can start using these open source tools, and there's a lot of write-ups for good guidances of ways to go figure out what people are using, right? You can go in and find email addresses. There's all kinds of stuff. In fact, there's paid services that'll do great email verification. When I do Spiderfoot, I'm actually using a number of different APIs that I use and pay for to go validate, that are made for normal salespeople to validate who your humans are in your organization. I'm going to go use those same tools against you that are perfect for my needs, right, Dom? Like I mean, there's tons of commercials to get email addresses. The breach data ones are pretty thin in here, right? Dehashed is one of them. Have I been pwned is another known one. I love that Ashley Madison, 14 years later, still shows up as a primary source. Just means people don't change passwords, I guess. But OSINT Framework's a great place to go poke around in if you ever want to try to learn some of these things yourself. I also would say go through, like try Hack Me and Hack the Box. There's some amazing training in that regard. Okay. What else would you do to find usernames, Dom? What's another way to try to figure out email address patterns?
The biggest thing is to get one person's email address. So if I Google, Tony Miller at Integris, he's put his email somewhere. There's some sort of thing where his email got leaked, right? And the interesting thing about most companies is that they want to be somewhat professional. So we give everyone the same format, right? My email is very public because I put it on all over the place. It's DomKirby@PaxA, which then I could just assume that yours is MLee, right? And I could go on and on and on. So it's really, really not hard to get everyone's email address. It's just not.
Yeah.
In fact, Rocket
And
Reach,
also don't even miss the fact that you can go to their website oftentimes and get at least a couple email addresses, right? Like Contact.
yes. Yes.
Probably doesn't have that, but they did a form. But your point is you can start getting the format. In this case, you wouldn't. But if you got one or two people and every one of them was MLee or Matt.lee or Matt.something.lee or like whatever it might be, you can then use that to try to find those patterns. Also, if you're doing something like Spiderfoot, it's already going to get a lot of that information through the API integrations. So it makes life a lot easier.
Well, and then you can start to do reverse searches, right? Like so Facebook allows you to search for friends by email address, depending on your Facebook settings. I think Twitter has a similar mechanism, right? So you can, and if you start learning about personal lives, now you have a way in from a social engineering perspective. That is pretty interesting.
One of the nice things about Outlook, too, I'm signed in, so it doesn't work, is that with Microsoft 365, I took a class called Breaching the Cloud with Bo Bullock. You can actually use Microsoft to validate Microsoft email addresses, right? Because if you type it in right, it'll take you to the right thing. If you don't, it won't. Yes. And so it is one of those things. There's other methods, too, in that regard. All right, so we want to find the users, and we want to know who they are, right? So we can use Google. We can go to their website. We can go to LinkedIn. We can use paid services that are aggregating this. It is also helpful, again, to your point of when you're doing this, you will show up in their feeds sometimes, and it is a good idea to have a fake pseudonym. And if you are ever curious, you can use, what is it, fake person generator? Is it
fakenamegenerator.com, I think.
That's right, yeah. This is the one. This will actually create you like male, white, 48, Lockport, New York. He's 196 pounds. And so you can actually just go generate new identities, which is actually one of the challenges.
Interesting. There's another one. There's another one you might want to try called Fake Name Generator. It'll give you social security number, like their MasterCard number, their Amex number, their Facebook names. Like it'll write a whole story. You could do from any part of the world, like different. Yeah. So it'll
and there's one that I found that always makes you 80 to 90 years old. I don't know what the purpose of that site was, but I couldn't get it to make me 30 or 40. These are actually making me 30 and 40. But yeah, again, it gives you a really easy to follow setup to go use as your person. It doesn't actually create these things for you in most cases. I've seen a couple services that do spin up those Gmail accounts for you and such, but you would go do it yourself.
It makes an email.
Oh, it actually does? Yeah. Very cool. Yeah. Very cool. That's been at Jurapide. Oh, it says here's a real email address. Click to activate. Yeah. So the point is, you can make these pseudo identities to go do that digging, so you don't show up on their site as a real person. They could.
I don't recommend using the password. I don't know why that's a feature, but everything else.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks for giving me a password you can sign into as well.
Yeah.
Went through acquisitions, some people, and then this last piece, which is what we already kind of did throughout, is trying to figure out what tools they're using. Like the first thing I do for every domain is go figure out what their help desk button is, what their remote support is. Why would you want to do that? Because that's probably where you have persistent connections to all your systems, like your RMM and your help thing and remote support tools. Those are the things I want to find so that I can hopefully crack them and get access to all your juicy machines. So I want to know what tools you're using for that purpose. I want to know and make sure that I actually know where they are, but I also want to know when I want to password spray. I want to have those sites so I can password spray against them. And it helps, like I said, with pretexting, right? Being able to say I'm actually with, ConnectWise or whoever it might be in that context.
An interesting attack surface, probably out of the scope of the hacking, is I used to talk to a lot of partners about you put your favorite client logos on your website, but you don't.
It's in the hacking.
Works for you. So perfect. So I call your customer and I say, this is Matt from Integris, and they're like, oh, you could come in, sure.
Yeah, and it might even be easier to gain access via that method and then actually attack the help desk from that now privileged account perspective, right? So there's a lot of things that
Yeah.
could be done in that regard, like new employee or, hey, we need a new admin. We're going to have to, whatever it might be. You could see that playing out. We're trying not to touch the end clients in the hackening, but it's definitely in the scope if we wanted it to, but we've definitely avoided any direct contact with clients or anything in that nature. Not to say we wouldn't social engineer as a client potentially and pretend to be that client in the other direction. But to the point is, the more I know about someone, the more I know how they think, the more I know what they're doing. I have ability to put together a story about them and tell a story to them potentially. All right. The next piece, which we already kind of poked into just a smidge, I just want to keep us on time, is once we've got this map, we've built up domain names and IP addresses and sites and certs and subdomains and functions and services you use and all those things. Before I start spraying passwords, I personally want to go look for vulnerabilities for a lot of reasons. One, did you misconfigure something? Are you not patching? And I likely can get a remote code execution, or I can gain access from that system or to that system. So one of the things that I want to look for is that. Well, again, we already showed it off, but Shodan is doing just that. Its whole purpose and its whole intention is to help you source and service that. Same thing with security trails and what they're doing. A lot of players are doing these things. So use those to your advantage so you can maintain the not touchy, the no touchy perspective. Okay, so that's mainly what I wanted to cover today is the recon aspect of this and down that path. What we'll do in future episodes, we're going to bring on some new people, and I'll let you introduce them here in a bit, to do some active enumeration, active things. And we're going to start showing a couple of the different, what we do beyond recon, how do we gain initial access, how do we go from initial access to growing our positional lateralization, all those things. So this is the first in that series. If you liked it, please let us know. And then Dom, if we want to kind of come back to regular mode, I'm done with sharing my screen.
All right, well, I think that brings us to the play of the day. But before we do that, I do want to touch, we said at the beginning of the show, only try this stuff on your own infrastructure, right? We are friendly with Integris. We don't think they're going to mind us doing a little bit of public information poking. But if you're trying this, do it with your own infrastructure, throw your own domains in there, and definitely don't go active on someone who you don't have explicit consent or you don't own the environment. But let's get back to the play of the day. Matt, let's do it.
Well, you led me right into the play of the day, which is think like an adversary. Look at what you expose. Look at what you choose to do that is easily seeable without you having any way to stop someone from doing it. Try to put out things that might misdirect. Maybe you put out ConnectWise when you're a Kaseya shop. Maybe you do other things that help drive that change and make it harder for someone to find the places to attack you, find the ways to pretext you. What if I get sold that you're on Kaseya and I call and say, hey, I'm with Kaseya? You're going to be like, no, definitely not. So the play of the day is thinking about your external infrastructure as if you were doing your own recon and own analysis on it as a threat actor. Can I find my people? Can I identify if there's breaches? Can I find vulnerabilities? Can I find services? Or have I done things to hide it? And if I was going to give you super duper 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 bonus Mattlee suggestion, don't use your primary email domain for your infrastructure. If you don't need to expose it, buy another one that doesn't tie to you, that I can't find in a web search easily. Think about yourself from an external viewer's lens. That's the play of the day.
Game over.
Man, right on time. All right. This has been a super fun show despite the chaos. This is stage one of hacking, right? So we're going to move on to stage two. Next week, we're going to have Gavin Klondike, and we're going to do a little bit more active reconnaissance, maybe cross some lines and see what we can start to get into, hopefully without getting into too much trouble. So join us next Wednesday at 2 o'clock Mountain Time in what I'm pretty sure is going to be less chaotic circumstances. Don't forget to sign up for Pax8 Beyond. Interact with us down below. Like, share, comment, subscribe, all of those fancy buttons, and we'll see you next time.